welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we got another great history episode of Kentucky. But before we get into that, I want to welcome our guest. We have Marlitta Perkins joining us and Andrew Feight, who is the professor of history at Shawnee State University. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Well, as this podcast has happened and throughout the years, every now and then I get these contacts. People message me and they say, "Hey, I've got this great bit of Kentucky history that I would like to talk about or share with you." And sometimes I know a little bit about it. Sometimes I don't know nothing about it. And today's episode, I don't know anything about. So I'm very excited to talk about it and get those questions out there and to dive into some of this Kentucky history or some of this unknown Kentucky history that our listeners probably don't know about. And I really appreciate you guys coming on to share it with us. But before we get into that, real quickly, tell us about your Kentucky connection. Marlitta, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Okay. I have roots in the state since before Kentucky was Kentucky. And, I just looking at my family history. But I was born actually in Virginia. I grew up in Europe. Then I went to Ohio, came back to Kentucky, the first member of my family in like 100 years. And
Wow.
the history here has interested me from day one. And I especially focused on Civil War history. I've got a blog that I write about Eastern Kentucky Civil War history. Then I started researching slavery in Eastern Kentucky. Everything I do is pretty much focused on Eastern Kentucky. And that's what actually brought me to the Appalachian Freedom Initiative, which I'm working for now, with Drew and a team. We're a team of researchers and, outreach specialists. And what we're trying to do is locating and documenting Underground Railroad history in the tri-state area, which would be Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. And it's been very satisfying and love to, bring this kind of history to the people. It's very important to me. So.
Yeah, well, and then I'll go ahead and say thanks for working on that history and getting it out there to the people, and in a way, in many different ways. There's many ways as possible to let people learn more. Andrew, what's your Kentucky connection?
Well, I first lived in Lexington starting about 1993. I moved to Kentucky from South Carolina, where I was in college. And so I came to the University of Kentucky to study history. And I got my master's and my PhD from the University of Kentucky, where I specialized in the history of slavery and abolition.
Awesome. That's again, I would say you got a good wealth of knowledge now. So you're a professor, right, at Shawnee State University. So when we get to the 1829 Greenup Slave Revolt, where do we start?
That's a good question. I mean, we had to, okay. I was researching this history independent from Andrew. Andrew was doing his thing while I was doing my thing. And then when we finally met to this project, we kind of, we kind of compared notes. And Drew had some information that I didn't have and vice versa. And then we said, okay, how do we uncover a story that's 196 years old?
Yeah.
So, of course, you're looking, Drew had a newspaper article, and that kind of, tipped us off to the slave revolt. There's basically no local knowledge of it left. You see little tidbits in history books where it's mentioned that there may have been something that happened, but no real vital detail. But then with the newspaper article, which reported on this incident about a week later, and I can read you this, and it's quite gripping. So the headline was "Affray and Murder," and it was published in the Scioto Gazette, which was actually a reprint from the Western Times that was published in Portsmouth by Julius Bingham, who was a known abolitionist and Underground Railroad operator. So he wrote about this. Affray and murder, a most shocking outrage, was committed in Kentucky, about 8 miles from this place, on the 14th instant. A Negro driver by the name of Gordon, who had purchased in Maryland about 60 Negroes, including all sexes and ages, was taken, them assisted by an associate named Allen, and the wagoner who conveyed the baggage to the Mississippi. The men were handcuffed and chained together in the usual manner for driving those poor wretches, while the women and children were suffered to proceed without encumbrance. It appears that by the means of a file, the Negroes, unobserved, had succeeded in separating the irons which bound their hands in such a way as to be able to throw them off at any moment. About 8 o'clock in the morning, while proceeding on the state road leading from Greenup to Vanceburg, 2 of them dropped their shackles and commenced a fight, when the wagoner Petit rushed in with a whip to compel them to desist. At this moment, every Negro was found perfectly at liberty, and one of them, seizing a club, gave Petit a violent blow on the head and laid him dead at his feet. And Allen, who had come to his assistance, met a similar fate from the contents of a pistol fired by another of the gang. Gordon was then attacked, seized, and held by one of the Negroes, whilst another fired twice at him with a pistol, the ball of which each time grazed his head, but not proving effectual. He was beaten with clubs and left for dead. They then commenced pillaging the wagon, and with axes opened the trunk of Gordon, rifled it. Of the money, about $2,400, 16 of the Negroes then took off to the woods. Gordon, in the meantime, not being materially injured, was enabled by the assistance of one of the women to mount his horse and flee, pursued, however, by one of the gang on another horse with a drawn pistol. Fortunately, he escaped with his life, barely arriving at a plantation as the Negro came in right, who then turned about and retreated. The neighborhood was immediately rallied, and a hot pursuit given, which was, we understand, has resulted in the capture of the whole gang and the recovery of the greater part of the money. 7 of the Negro men and 1 woman, it is said, were engaged in the murders and will be brought to trial at the next court in Greenupsburg. So this is what we started out with.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, that
Jameson,
sounds.
if I could,
Yes.
yeah, I would just say, the historical record is incredibly dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
To go back to the original, I mean, this is the only original account of the escape and the revolt. And when I first came across it, I was just doing sort of keyword searches and probably Google Books or something like that. I had
Mm-hmm.
recently taken a job here at Shawnee State. This was more than a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I was teaching a class in Ohio history, and I was trying to incorporate Portsmouth stories. And I knew there was Underground Railroad related history in the area, but I think I had done a keyword search on Portsmouth slavery or slaves or something like that. And this hit came back from David Walker's appeal, which I immediately recognized. David Walker is a famous African American abolitionist from Boston,
Mm-hmm.
who published his appeal just actually a few weeks after the slave revolt in Kentucky. And what he did in his publication was he included the newspaper account that Marlitta just read. So
Mm-hmm.
that was how I originally found the newspaper article. And over the years, I continued to research it. And unbeknownst to me, Marlitta was out there. Didn't know her at all. She was working on the topic herself. And at
Yeah.
some point, our paths crossed, and we
Mhm.
both were like, "Oh my gosh, this person knows a lot about this." Um,
Yeah.
and nobody knows about this. And I think in fact you were the one, Marlitta, who told me Dinah's name, the
Yeah.
woman's name. I didn't know her name because it was not in that original news report. But
Yeah.
we have since been able to find many names.
We found all the
Amazing, all
yeah.
the names.
Mhm.
We found all the names and, never dreamed that this would actually be possible. I mean, the research and it's just mind blowing what we were uncovering. And so court records did not exist at this point in
Mhm.
time because, well, Greenup, right on the Ohio River, you have the 1937 flood. It flooded the courthouse. It took a lot of these records
Mhm.
and down the river. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
So, but we had court order books. So the court order books, are basically like, well, it gives you uh, like a summary of what happened in court that day. So it don't give you the
Mhm.
exact proceedings. It doesn't give you who showed up, who the lawyers were or whatever. It gives you the names of the accused and it gave you the name of the jury. Even the judge we had to research to find out, who the judge was in this case. But it slowly came together and reading these old records very carefully, we found some amazing detail. It's like you're playing like Sherlock Holmes. You're looking at tiny little things, like for example, the court appointed a jury of matrons. That's a very unusual thing to happen, and that's only in case you have a defendant that is actually pregnant. So, since Dinah was the only woman that was actually standing trial for the murders, so it was Dinah, and we didn't, and that's not mentioned in the newspaper article at all that she was pregnant. So she was examined by this jury of matrons, which consisted of 12 local women that had some basic knowledge about pregnancy and, childbirth, the whole thing. And they physically examined her for signs of, pregnancy. I mean, Dinah claimed the belly. That was the legal term. She claimed that she was pregnant. And so they examined her. They took her to a local house in Greenup and found that she was not only pregnant, but she was also quick with child, which was a very important detail. Meaning, if you're quick with child, the women could actually feel the movement of the baby. And that gave her a reprieve. I mean, for murder, especially if you were an enslaved person, it was an automatic death sentence. I mean, there was no question about that. And so she at least received a reprieve. And, that was an amazing detail right there. She was, well, we found out later, she was 22 years old. Can you imagine? You know, but I kind of
Yeah.
like to talk about the coffle itself to really make you understand what these people actually went through before they even got to Greenup. They originated in Maryland, like the newspaper article said. We found later on that they actually came out of Somerset County. And I looked at all kinds of records from Maryland at first. And it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. We didn't even know the first names of these slave traders. And
Mhm.
we did not know what county to look for. And the time frame, the 1820s, there was a lot of slave trading going on in Maryland. I mean, it was the time where, you know, uh, cotton became king. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think Drew can talk about that a little bit more. too, you know,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
background of that. But
Yeah, I
so,
mean, I'll just say, there's kind of the big picture,
Mhm.
of how this fits into Western expansion, the
mhm,
development of the internal slave trade, um, and how that both generated resistance, to slavery, like we see here in Greenup.
yeah,
Um, but more generally, you see a lot of um, African Americans running away, fleeing, escaping, because of the threat of family separation or actual family
mhm,
separation, right? So,
Mhm.
with the impending sale or the threat of being sold downriver to the cotton plantations that were, being built out down in Mississippi and Texas, Louisiana,
mhm,
just the threat, or getting wind that maybe your master was going to break up your family and sell you,
Mhm.
led to many escape attempts.
mhm,
And I think that's one way to understand why this happened in Greenup and when it did.
mhm. Yeah, the
Mhm.
time frame is very important because at that time, the internal slave trade really peaked. And, it was a in looking at the slave traders, I became aware that a lot of these men, I mean, you have the idea of a slave trader just being a dirty old whatever slime ball, and, I mean, there's this
Mhm.
image. But looking at these people, these were actually from what you would consider, you know, upstanding families, and they came from reputable families, and these
Mhm.
were guys that were, like, in their 20s and, for whatever reasons, went into slave trading. A lot of these guys weren't married. So I'm assuming, back then, unless you had some kind of fortune and you wanted to marry, favorably, you had to have some type of, money or property or whatever. That was a way to make a quick buck. And there was a lot
Mhm.
of money involved in this. And
Mhm.
and that was exactly these two, Gordon and Allen, fit that fit
Yep.
that mold exactly. And it's kind of shocking to me, really. I mean, Allen came from Paris, Bourbon
Wow.
County, and his father was Major Allen, John Allen, and he was the first county judge and first uh, county attorney. He was a founding member of the Bourbon Academy. I mean, we're talking, reputable
High
family.
society. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And with Gordon the same way. I mean, his father, they came from North Carolina and they settled in Tennessee and founded a town, and his father was a judge and first postmaster. I mean, you get the idea. He was a
Mhm.
merchant, but in both cases, these sons of theirs were the younger ones. Like Gabriel Allen was the youngest, and all his siblings already were established. They were married. They had
Yep.
businesses. And slavery was a big thing in that family. I mean, it was very common. It was comfortable with that. And the same thing with Gordon in Tennessee. Gordon came eventually to Paris, and I think that's where both their ways crossed, and they decided to go into business with each other. So it's quite fascinating. But anyhow, we were able to locate the county where they came from. Um, so they traveled from Somerset County in Maryland, crossed Chesapeake Bay, went to Baltimore, ended up in Alexandria, which is near Washington, D.C., um, then went on to Richmond, Virginia, and then they headed towards the Ohio River. They went to Lexington, not Kentucky, but Virginia, and Lewisburg, White Sulphur Springs. So they were working their way down the Kanawha Valley and, past the salt works on the Kanawha, which was also slave labor.
Mhm.
Charleston, and then Barboursville, Guyandotte. And that is where they first saw the Ohio River, which, of course, the Ohio River was always considered like, you know, freedom was right on the other side. They could actually
Mhm.
look at it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's when the idea kind of materialized that, hey, we're this close, we can do
Mhm.
this. And so they marched from Guyandotte along the Ohio River and got to the mouth of the Big Sandy River and crossed over into Catlettsburg and then just followed the shoreline until they got to uh, Greenupsburg. Well, it was called Greenupsburg then. But all all along the way, I'm sure that, you know, they knew what that meant. If they would have been able to cross that river, there was freedom
Mhm.
there, you know.
Yeah, it's on the other side, kinda,
Yeah.
taunting
Yeah.
them, I'm sure, like, teasing them, it's that close.
That
Um,
that, you know, you're looking at it, you're that close and it's so far off. And, you know,
mhm.
along the way, they were able to pick up a file. And they met enslaved people along the way. And I have a feeling they were helped, you know, during that time. They passed Amanda Furnace, which was still under construction. It was almost finished, and they camped nearby. So they had an opportunity somehow to, you know, get tools. And by the time they went to Greenup, um, they moved away from the Ohio River.
Right.
So they camped about 8 miles outside of Greenup, near a little town called Liberty. Ironic. And Liberty don't exist anymore, but there's a small town there now close by called Lynn.
Mhm.
And so they camped, and during the night, from August 13th to August 14th of 1829, is when they managed to undo the shackles with a plow. I
Yeah.
they managed to do it. It's unbelievable. So, and then, you know, you heard the newspaper, report. Uh,
Mhm.
the next morning, well, the two of them were free, and they were fighting with each other, and then it just all exploded, basically.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the funny part is, I mean, even grapevine back then worked really well because within 4 days, 6 enslaved people actually escaped from Bellefonte Furnace, which was not all that far off in Greenup County.
Mhm.
And I'm a firm believer that, yeah, I can't prove it, but the timing of this, uncanny. So
Mhm.
they heard about this revolt, and I think it really energized those guys to
Yeah.
go ahead and escape, and they managed. They did. And we
Mhm.
were
Mhm.
never able to really find out, um, what happened to them, but there's also no reports that they were ever captured. So,
Mhm. Yeah. So, and real quickly too, Greenup County, for those people who may not be aware, it's in the northeastern part of Kentucky.
mhm,
Um, real close to Ashland on the east, and in Catlettsburg and those areas. Um, so that's a lot. It's a lot to to think about. When you're looking at obviously it was a little bit planned. They saw the opportunity
mhm.
to go. The slave traders, the, were they just transporting, or were they going, or were they going, like, went to buy and then sell? How what was, you know how close was their relationship with the enslaved, or was it just set, random as far as
Pure
So
that goes? Do we
business.
know?
Pure business.
Huh.
yeah.
They did
Okay.
not look at them as human beings, and I can tell you,
Hmm.
when Gordon actually lived in Paris, I found a lawsuit, and it really shocked me, but it told me a whole lot about the character of this man. And so what he
Hmm.
did is he bought a slave girl, 16 years old, from someone in Bourbon County, and she was defective. She was sickly, and he had a problem with that, and so he took this man to court and wanted his money back, plus wanted to be reimbursed damages for misleading him and, using labor and God knows what. And when he described her, he said that she was basically worthless. How do you
And
describe a human being as being worthless?
Yeah.
16 years old. I mean, I
and
just wanted to cry.
Yeah.
I think the bill of sales that we were able to locate in Maryland really tell the tale as well, because
Mhm,
um, Gordon, uh, he was there in person with Alan. They're both there. They're both going almost like door to door, seemingly trying to
Mhm.
buy slaves, and
Yeah.
and we can see how old they are, and he's buying children, young
mhm,
women that are pregnant, with the plan to march them, over 1,000 miles on
Yeah.
foot. I mean, it, it it is a window into the brutality of the interstate slave trade.
yeah, yeah. And well, I think the main peak season of purchasing slaves in Maryland anyway, and this is based on newspaper records, which are really great for that time period there, where, helped a lot.
Mhm.
Um, Starting around May, so Gordon and Allen made their way to Somerset County and stayed there for 2 months, and they actually advertised, and slaves that they were looking for, the prime age was considered between 12 and 25. So
Mhm.
the youngest, uh, member of this couple was 7 months old, 7 months, and the oldest was 30. So and the majority fit right into that into that age category between 12 and 25, because that was the
Mhm.
most productive,
Mhm.
time, or, you know, I mean, by the time they were 30 or 35, if they worked them hard, I mean, they were not worth that much anymore. A young woman was already, getting to that point where she was past her prime of producing children, which was the whole point, uh, of having them.
Yeah.
So it was brutal. I mean, like I said, it
Yeah,
Yeah.
was dog signs. It was not people.
and to your kind of question about Gordon and Allen and their involvement in all the different aspects of this, like they, Marletta was able to basically track Gordon and his operation, his
Mhm.
slave trading
Yeah.
to Natchez, and then just across the river, where he and his family owned uh, cotton plantations.
Mhm,
So he was both supplying uh, his own plantation, but he
Mhm.
also was engaged in speculation, basically going all the way to Maryland to buy the slave property as cheaply as he could,
mhm,
to then transport them, well, to force march them all the way, to Natchez, where he then would put them up for sale, and they
mhm.
would get a much higher
Yeah.
price.
Right.
Um, and Marletta, right? I mean, you found that even after the revolt, when he almost was murdered, he
He
went
went
back
he
to
went back
Maryland for another trip, and
one more
and
time. Yeah.
yeah,
I think he'd been there for 5 consecutive years, and pretty much did all this on his own, and when he met Alan, you know, wanted a piece of that pie
Mhm.
too, and he had just inherited some money, from his father's estate, and so I think he was probably one of the main, uh, financiers, so to speak, for this whole undertaking, and they purchased 58 slaves for $11,500, which, if you convert that into today's money, is about $390,000. So we're talking large sum of money. So this was a big business, and a way to get rich. Um, but yeah, he made 5 trips, and after he was almost killed, Gordon went back the following year, and I found all the sales receipts for all these years. And he purchased every year anywhere between 30 and maybe 60 slaves. Now the last year, he walked away with 5. And the story of the slave revolt actually was published in the local paper in Somerset County. So everybody knew. Everybody knew about what happened to him and his couple. And so I don't know if that was an issue with the locals and they just didn't want to sell to him, or maybe he did lose
Yeah.
his nerve. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But and the ironic thing is, like I mentioned, Gordon, Allen, so he was killed in Greenup County. So I think he's still buried there somewhere around, the shores of Tigard Creek, because he's not buried with the rest of his family in Paris. I checked on that. And local lore has it that there is a grave at Tigard Creek, and I'm pretty sure that's him. But his brother, and like I said, they were all, pro-slavery, and also did some heavy trading in slavery, in slaves. His brother, 6 years later, was killed also in a similar manner. He took slaves down the Ohio River on a flatboat, and they, overpowered him and killed him.
Yeah,
So there's
so
2
2
sons.
brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2 sons in that family died. And Gordon, didn't really meet a very good end either. He was at the cotton plantation down in Louisiana that he actually went into business with his father to run. Well, they had 2 plantations actually. But Gordon kind of liked to live high on the hog, and he traveled, and all this money he was making, it was going to his head, and he was spending it as he was making it. And he actually thought about going into politics. And, he actually ran for office. And, he was very generous with his money, but he never reinvested it into the business so that the debts weren't paid. And his father, put a stop to it and just inherited him. And that's what killed it. I mean, he took one of the plantations was sold. The slaves were divided. So some of the slaves that they had at the cotton plantations came back to Tennessee. And he died within a year. So there's rumors that he committed suicide. It's bad karma. It was bad karma. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
It was not a good business. There is no happy ending to these stories,
No.
And to come back to the Greenup Slave Revolt, so we had 5 men and 1 woman. So Dinah, Lazarus Fisher, John Hooper, Levin, Jesse, and Daniel, and were indicted for murder. So Dinah, thankfully, was able to, at least for the time being, had a reprieve. But now the other 5, Daniel, they made quick business in Greenup County so they had the grand jury and return it as a true sentence. And then it went to trial the next day. And the day after, they announced, death sentence for everyone.
Except for Daniel.
Except 1.
Yeah.
Except for Daniel,
yes,
right. So Daniel, for some reason, was not found guilty, and he was reprimanded back to jail. So, at least he didn't have to pay with his life for this. But now the other 4, on the other hand, were hanged. They were hanged in Greenup, at the outskirts of Greenup.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was actually a very dramatic also written by Bingham, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure, account of that, and I can read that to you, and it's very
Mhm.
interesting. It says, so execution of Negroes. We have been told by one of who was present at the execution of the 4 Negro slaves at Greenupsburg on Friday that they all maintained to the last the utmost firmness and resignation to their fate. They severally addressed the assembled multitude in which they attempted to justify the deed they had committed on the principle acknowledged by all wise men that it is lawful in the sight of God, and a principle implanted in the breast of every man by nature, to fight for freedom and slay the tyrant who dares to deprive them of it. This only they have done, and having failed to accomplish that's the sole object for which they slew their merciless oppressors, traffickers in human flesh, it remained for them to pay the forfeiture of that failure with their lives. They were willing to do so. They had done so no more than their judges and executioners would have done under similar circumstances. And that too was a solemn appeal to the judge of heaven and earth for the integrity of their motives and the justice of their cause. One of them, while standing upon the cart just ready to be launched into eternity, exclaimed several times, "Death, death, any time, in preference to slavery." During the whole time they stood under the gallows, not a joint seemed to tremble, nor a sight heard to escape from them. They joined with great animation in the singing of a hymn, after which they shook cordially the hands of all who were near them and were launched off, enjoying what they supposed to be the full triumph of the Christian faith. This was published in the Portsmouth Times.
hmm
Well, that is uh, that is a wild scene, I guess, so to be at. I mean, geez, that's moving as well. I mean, to say, we're
Yeah,
ready for, we prefer death over slavery. I mean, that's
yeah.
heavy. Um,
Well, it shows the
mhm,
commitment, and I think it also shows, how desperate, how brutal slavery was, that it, drove people to such desperate acts. They had no choice.
mhm,
I mean, they had a choice between, being sold down the river to Natchez
yeah,
was almost like a death sentence. I mean, it was just not a life.
mhm,
And so what choice did they have?
yep.
And it felt justified. And like they said,
hmm
the judges and executioners would have done the same thing if somebody
If
would
it
have
was them,
deprived
yeah,
them of their liberty,
And they were
you know?
close to Ohio, right? I mean, they were eight
Yeah.
miles away. They had just the day before turned in from the river and were headed,
Mhm.
into the interior. And they got to
Mhm.
Taggart Creek, and this is, where the revolt happened, and they would have understood and known that that was a tributary of the Ohio, that it was flowing
Oh,
north, and that they could follow Taggart Creek, and they may have even known the geography, that there was a city there called Portsmouth, Ohio,
mhm,
and that there was a
yeah.
black community in Portsmouth that would have welcomed them and hid them, right?
yeah,
So,
Mhm.
um, understanding the geography is important, um, and
Mhm.
the fact that freedom really was possibly obtainable, but as we know from the reporting, all of those who escaped were eventually recaptured.
mm.
Yeah.
We're going to pause right there with our discussion about the Greenup Slave Revolt. We want to thank our guests for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, If you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you, the viewers, the listeners. We want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.